This is a painting by Remedios Varo, a woman who, over the course of her life, found herself at the center of several violent political conflicts, who always was unfortunate enough to be positioned as an outsider in any situation that she entered, who took those frustrations at the people and systems built around her, and told her globe-spanning story through art. On December 16, 1908, Varo was born in the small town of Angeles, in the northeast of Spain, but would move as a young child to Madrid, where she was raised by her very strict working-class Catholic parents. She would go to the local Catholic school, which made her miserable, and as a result, at a young age, she became an avid reader to escape the life that she found herself submerged within against her will, diving into the works of authors such as Jules Verne and Alexandre Dumas, falling in love with the vivid fairy tale-like illustrations that accompanied these tales, and others like them. Her father, a hydraulic engineer, taught her the technical drawing skills that he learned through his work, and also helped to foster her interests in creating and in art. She married young to a man it seems she didn't quite care for entirely, a fellow art student in Madrid. In reading about her story, you never get a good sense of him. He is only mentioned as a means for her to escape her Catholic existence with her parents, as an excuse to leave for a new town, and with that, a possible new way of life. The couple were only married for 7 years, when in 1937, Varo entered into a fling with the surrealist artist and political essayist, Esteban Francis. She left her husband, and joined Francis to fight together in the Spanish Civil War. While engaged in the conflict, she would come into contact with the surrealist poet, Benjamin Pare, who she also took as a lover. In 1938, Pare, Francis, and Varo would relocate together to Paris to be at the center of the art world, and rented a studio for the three of them to work out of. But this experience was not all that she had hoped that it would be. In one letter to a friend, she said, reflecting on this time, "It is not easy to live on painting in Paris. Sometimes I did not have more food in an entire day than a small cup of coffee with milk. That bohemian life that is supposed to be necessary for the artist is very bitter." Pare was at the time a very established and well-respected author, working in the Dadaist movement of the 20s before joining the Surrealist in the 30s. Francis, who was just starting out, was accepted within the circle of the Surrealists, but Varo, not so much. Not because of her skill as an artist or what they perceived as a lack thereof, but more simply put because she was a woman. The role of women within the Surrealist movement was a classical one, where women largely were meant to be depicted, swooned, worshipped, observed. The man was the artist and the woman his muse, an idea that Varo would later explore in her own art, such as here, where a man sits at a desk composing, but the spirit of a woman reaches out and guides his process. There were obviously women involved in the multiple ongoing and constantly evolving surrealist societies, but each one struggled to find her place to be accepted and seen, much harder than the men who sought similar acceptance within these collectives. An example that demonstrates this is that even if a woman contributed to the many surrealist manifestos that were published, she was not allowed to sign it. Only the signatures of men can be found in these. They held the power, and were the official definitive voices within the movement. Something to keep in mind here though, which isn't said to excuse their actions at all, but she was still under 30 years old in this period. She was very much figuring out who she was, both as a person and as an artist, which is clearly evident in her early paintings, which are very surrealist in style but do not necessarily feel like her. They just feel like someone that is trying to make something in the stylings of the surrealists, such as here with her painting Insomnia, which is clearly an emulation of Magritte. She's not even fully comfortable in what medium she wants to exist in, as in this period during the Civil War and her time in France. You can find graphite drawings, paper-cut collages, sculpture, and photographs, as well as her paintings. It was an exploratory time for her, venturing into many mediums but not being a master of any. So you have to at least consider that in this period, she is a young, unestablished creator, trying to publicly stand shoulder to shoulder with the likes of Dali, Ernst, Buñuel, and Magritte, from the moment that she comes to France. I don't know if you can fully blame them for not taking her seriously in the short time that she spent in Paris. Nevertheless, the fact is clear that she spent her days doing odd jobs for money, struggling, forging illegal copies of classical paintings for fraud, and her nights passed in the company of some of the most famous artists and thinkers in world history. She would say, "Yes, I attended those meetings where they talked a lot, and one learned various things. Sometimes I participated with works in their exhibitions. I was not old enough and did not have the aplomb to face up to them, to a Paul Eluard, a Benjamin Perret, or an André Breton. I was with an open mouth within this group of brilliant and gifted people. I was together with them because I felt a certain affinity." In the summer of 1940, the Nazis took Paris. Perret was arrested as a danger to the new regime for being a public, well-known critical voice as a political writer, and Varo was arrested for her association with him, as the two shared a studio. Due to mysterious circumstances, however, both were sometime later freed from prison. It is unclear if they were released or somehow escaped, as the fall of Paris and her time in the Nazi prison is a subject that Varo refused to ever speak on because it was so traumatic. In fact, there is little that remains of her writing because she did not speak of herself often, her experiences, or her beliefs, saying, "I do not wish to talk about myself, because I hold very deeply the belief that what is important is the work, not the person." There is a full year of her life where she is unaccounted for. We really do not know what happened to her. By late 1941, the two traveled to Marseille and stayed there for several months trying to procure papers to leave the country, and eventually escaped on a boat to Mexico, something that they assumed would be temporary, and that they would soon again be rejoining their friends in Paris once the conflict was resolved. But Varo, who could not return to her home in Franco-controlled Spain because of her history in the Civil War, ended up spending the rest of her life as a political refugee in Mexico. Perret loved Varo deeply, and he stayed some time with her in the region, but the relationship did not last, and he inevitably returned to France in 1947. Every book he published from then on was dedicated to her. There she entered the circle of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, and dedicated herself to a life of art, becoming extremely close and having a tight bond with the artists Leonora Carrington and Katie Orna, who were both similarly political exiles displaced from Europe. By the end of her life, she eventually grew to love Mexico. She spoke fondly of it, but had mixed feelings obviously on everything surrounding the way that her life had turned out. When talking about her low artistic output while in France, compared to how she thrived in the later half of the 40s, she said, "For me, it was impossible to paint among such anxiety. In this country, I have found the tranquility that I have always searched for. I am more from Mexico than any other place. I know little of Spain. I was very young when I lived there. Then I lived the years of apprenticeship and assimilation in Paris. Then the war. It is in Mexico that I felt welcome and secure." Varo lived and worked the entire second half of her life in exile from her home country. She made most of her works, and certainly all of her well-known works, in something that she initially perceived as a prison. And I believe that is reflected in almost every piece that she ever produced. If you know her story and her experiences, then you can look at each of her paintings and see that story reflected there as well. Her pains, her struggles, her disdain, a longingness for whimsy, for a different way to be. Seeing her paint is like cutting her open to show what's really inside. Something uncommon, and also significant about her, is that she was successful as an artist within her lifetime. She did not struggle, at least financially, in the latter half of her career while in Mexico. She also was not just successful in fine art spaces, but also was well known within the public eye, and even worked commercially. In fact, that painting we mentioned a moment ago, Insomnia, was commissioned by the Bear Company for a magazine advertisement about their sleeping medication. Before the fall of Paris, she never received the recognition from the key surrealists that she desired, but in her time in Spain and in Paris, and especially in Mexico, she had a positive contemporary public reception for her talents. By 1937, before she was even 30, she had exhibited works in London, Tokyo, Paris, Amsterdam, and Mexico City. So while not extraordinarily known today, she was certainly prolific and regarded in her time, even though there were periods in her life where she was in dicey financial situations. But name an artist who that couldn't also be said for. And while I think the modern art world, as well as the history of fine art in general, has been corrupted with money, and really should not be discussed when talking about the impact of an artist's work, or the meaning of an artist's work in life. I do here think that it is important in this instance to mention that one of her paintings, Harmony, is the second highest price at auction for a Latina artist to ever receive, selling for $6.2 million, second only to a work by Frida Kahlo, which sold for $8 million. Her work is recognizable on sight. You can see a painting from her later years and know that it is just one of hers. She had that quality to the style that she developed after leaving the surrealists behind. There is a deliberate personal break there once she gets to Mexico, an overwhelmingly Catholic country and people. A few of the surrealists, in particular Dali, embraced Christianity within their works. It is venerated through their style, or at the very least presented as an interesting subject to depict. But Varo is quite critical and purposefully anti-Catholic in her scenes. Their base style is the same, as Varo's was born out of a study of their work, but where they go from there are quite different, as we will see. There are other overlaps she shares with the movement, other than merely her inspirations from them. Varo and Salvador Dali both received training through the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in San Fernando in Madrid. They were even there within a close window of time, as Dali was only 4 years older, and the two shouldn't be compared just on a similar subject matter, as both artists share an obvious, meticulous attention to detail. And their base techniques in school were derived from this study of the old masters. Each of her paintings are scenes presented to us in a heightened, dreamlike world, intended to confront us with a feeling of emotion, or a message that she wishes to convey, maybe not outright, but instead on a deeper, subconscious level, as if a stage has been built just for our benefit. This is not reality, it is theatrical, and in that, while differing visually, it has a great deal of common ground with some of the most renowned works in the history of art. And her purposeful use of a Renaissance style is reminiscent of that. From a young age, she became obsessed with the ideas of the Russian mystic Georgy Gurdjieff, who proposed that we are born asleep, and that we stay that way unless we are able to achieve a state of higher consciousness, through artistic expression and enlightenment. And it is the job of the artist to assist those along that path who are not capable of creating themselves. The artist, or creator, is the conveyor of concepts that cannot be expressed in words, and instead are given through visions. An idea present in her painting titled The Juggler, where a fantastical shimmering figure stands before a crowd, demonstrating his magic. They are all the same, wrapped in one giant robe cut from a single piece of cloth. He is special, and trying to share what makes him special with those who have not yet realized that they too can be like him, if they only were to tear themselves from this cloth, and fashion themselves to be different, or unique. He performs just one of the many tricks he obviously has at his disposal, judging from the tools of craft that he surrounds himself with. It is important to note that the only feminine figure in the painting is trapped in the magician's cart. She is boxed in this space with her eyes closed, not permitted what the others are allowed. Varo places herself in this painting twice, both as the woman, who is restricted and not given the opportunity to participate freely within the society, but also as the publicly appreciated performer, spinning dreams for the masses to wonder at. Both travel in the magician's cart, and are one and the same. There is a central theme throughout her work of women being depicted in ways that constrain them within their surroundings. Here, these featureless women work at a device inside, as if they are just a part of its interchangeable mechanisms, while a male centaur roams outdoors, in an undeniably much more interesting landscape than they are offered in their sterile tower. In Plant Cathedral, a woman is contained within a carriage while she is carried through the woods, the trees of which are in reality the pillars of a large, strange, unknowable church. The natural world around her has been manufactured and covered with an unnatural ceiling of male-dominating power and oppression. In this painting, she can be seen as being trapped within 3 layers of a prison designed just for her. In Embroidering the Earth's Mantle, women work locked away in a tower overseen by a masculine, religious figure who is producing nothing, while they themselves spool the cloth that the very foundations of the world is built upon. These women in blue appear in 2 other works of hers. An earlier painting, The Tower, where a religious man leads them from a convent on bicycles, and a later painting, La Huida, which could translate to the flight or the escape, shows one of the women being carried away on the clouds to a hideaway in the mountains. This angelic figure with the ability to fly could be read as a possible lover, a representation of her gaining an autonomy and separating from the church and becoming a sexual being, with the added sacrilege of sleeping with the divine presence. Another woman, titled the Star Maker, lives in a solitary room in a similar tower as she grinds the powders that make a sky that she herself cannot see. The moon, which is a symbol often associated with women, is withered and locked away in a cage, where she feeds it scraps with a spoon by hand. With the portrait of Dr. Ignacio Chavez, we are shown a reality where women wait in line to see a man of power, visually coded to resemble a holy man, with devices that constrain their bodies. Devices that can only be opened with the key that he holds to the lock over their heart. They are like puppets, with strings on their limbs that go up to the sky and connect to the constellations of the stars. The sign they dangle from is Cancer, which governs illness and matters of the heart. They are flesh, but encased in this device, and made to exist to be manipulated like a toy and penetrated by this man, in a world that he obviously controls. In another scene, a woman dressed entirely in gray sits working in a chair in the dark and dingy corner of a room, as her colorful spirit flows from her work to gaze out of the window to a world that she cannot see from her position with her physical eyes. But through the things that she makes, she is allowed an ethereal sight that, while not based in reality, is just as powerful and just as legitimate. She may be physically restrained, but her mind and creativity cannot be controlled, and is free to venture and travel realms beyond the realness of our physical existence. In another, several men float freely through a landscape, except for a lone feminine figure who is constrained and being pulled down by a man's beard. There is a presence in her work of the real person being hidden behind the false one that is created for us by the structures that are around us. Arguably her most famous painting, Phenomenon, depicts a shadow walking down the street, pulling the actual person behind it on the ground. There is the shadow that we project to the world, and the person who we really are. And rarely do the dreams, desires, or motivations that keep those separate identities alive overlap or complement each other. There are the public selves that are projections meant to protect the desires of the real person, who lies wrapped in hiding. People are complicated creatures made of their surroundings, trapped in cages that are societally built around them before they are even born, defined in many ways before their first breath is even taken. And it is a reoccurring theme that can be found in almost every one of her paintings. The outer husk that toils in the way that they have been told they must abide, and the inner dreamer that longs for a different way of being, who creates worlds that are strange and unknowable. And in this, it makes perfect sense that the artist as a concept is the subject of so many of her paintings. Creators, or people who make things or present things, are found in almost all of her art, as visual coders of the types of people who found their own way in individualism, and were lucky enough not to get swept up into the horrible, crushing institutions that make up our physical world. There are many vaginal images that she produces in association with women, their clothes, boats, headpieces, a desk. It is a constant examination of the feminine expression through the lens of God, the state, the workforce, and the expectations that come from all of those angles. The Lovers depicts two figures side by side, one male, one female, with mirrors for heads that show the same face on each. These people are, or at least should, be one and the same, a reflection of each other, complements of one another, flesh of one's flesh. An image that would be taken and repurposed in Madonna's 1994 music video for Bedtime Stories. This playing of themes involving gender, institutions, power, and monotony are constants for her that she would return to decade after decade, as she examined the facade that we have built around us. This public theater that we are active players in every day, the false things that we pretend are real. This is the last painting produced by Remedios Varo in her lifetime. She also started this canvas, but only outlined the planned painting in pencil before dying of a heart attack on April 8th of 1963. The last thoughts that she was trying to share with us are one that grapples with her then 30-year connection to the surrealists, and another that depicts mankind's relationship with nature and machines. An old world meeting a new one, the juxtaposition of those ideas in contrast to one another, and the life that rested in the middle of all of that. In 1964, in the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico City, a tribute and celebration was held dedicated to the life and works of Varo. This event had the record most number of attendees who came to see her paintings on display out of any other event since the building's construction in 1904. She is today a widely recognized and respected figure in Mexican history, but still is largely unknown to the rest of the world. But I think she is a figure that should be remembered, not just for her unique talents and style, or her story, or the ideas that she wanted to communicate and share with us, but also as a cross-section in the history of art, of women taking their place within the fine art space. She was born into a war, rubbed shoulders with some of the most renowned minds in art history that represented an old way of doing things, only to find success and join the likes of Kahlo, Louise Bourgeois, O'Keeffe, Dorothea Lange, and June Leaf, as women artists who created their own movements, and showed that they too could make great works of value, that spoke in that ethereal, non-verbal way, that spun dreams to allow others to see things that they otherwise couldn't.